What's up, everyone? I'm Matt Martin, the Grass Factor, and today we are dissecting a super controversial topic. But hopefully by the end of this video, we'll be able to come to some sort of consensus over whether or not humic acid is a scam. Real quick, I want to insert a trigger warning. If you practice faith-based agronomy, you do not care how your dollars are spent, or you genuinely do not have an interest in how active ingredients work for or against you, this video is likely not for you. With that out of the way, let's jump in to the meat and potatoes of the content.
All right, I just got my miles in and I'm exhausted, to be honest. So a few weeks ago, I sat down, I took my blood test, I sent it into Hone. And here's the thing, I'm 34 years old, I'm hairy as hell, I've got 2 kids, I look like a gorilla. There's no way I thought low testosterone was anywhere on my menu. And I was floored, stunned with the results that I got back. I didn't know what to think. It was shocking, and it made me feel a bit, I don't know, weak. Maybe I'll use this term loosely, earmuffs for the kids. I felt a bit like a bitch, right? And I didn't know really how to handle that shock and awe phase. But I waited until I had my consultation with my doctor, and the day came, and of course nothing ever goes to plan, right? So I'm at work, my schedule is coming up, and what happens? Something catastrophic happens. I have to jump on a forklift. Not even 1 minute before this meeting starts, the doctor jumps on. I'm holding the camera in front of my face while I'm trying to navigate a forklift. You can't hear anything. There's all kinds of loud equipment running in the background. And the doctor's a little bit laughing, and I give him the signal to hold on. Finally, I get outside and I'm able to talk to him. And I gotta say, it was, of all the apprehension and weirdness that I felt before having seen my blood work, I was presented with an opportunity to remedy that. I was presented with a treatment plan that let me know I didn't have to feel the way I'm feeling right now. The doctor said something to me that I'm gonna carry with me for a long time. In fact, I'm still riding the high from it right now. He told me, he said, listen, with your testosterone levels, the way they are, especially at your age, this treatment is gonna be life-changing. It will absolutely change your life. And for me, that was all I needed to hear. I'm exhausted all the time. I'm tired of using the excuse of being tired. What is one of the old phrases? I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And this is my opportunity to do something. If you're stuck in the same rut, if you're stuck in the same training rut, if you're stuck in the same rut with your home life, your love life, whatever the case may be, it's time to work on yourself like I am. honehealth.com/the grass factor. Join me on my journey. We can do this together. I'll keep you updated as we start to undergo treatment and let you know the physical and positive changes that take place with me. Now stick around, because what we've got to cover is extremely controversial.
Due to the length of this video and the complexity of the topics, I have opted to break this video into multiple chapters. So feel free, they are marked with timestamps. You can fast forward or go back to which of these to start an individual section. When discussing humic acids, especially from the standpoint of trying to figure out whether a product is snake oil or not, it's important to quantify exactly what is it. And I think the most important place for us to start is to actually start with a broader umbrella term, humic substances. So first, we must quantify what are humic substances. The most simple definition of humic substances are the organic compounds that make up humus. Now, before we get too crazy out there trying to insert all these different worms that we don't have definitions for, let's go ahead and define what exactly humus is. And this can be a little bit more complex because there is no real scientific consensus on how to exactly define humus, but we'll give it a shot. Humus is the decomposed portion of the soil that's made up from microorganisms, actual organisms, leaf tissue, plant tissue, root tissue, all of these things that die and are digested by microbes. That is how we're going to define soil humus. Now, humic substance are the individual components that make up humus. And we even further break down the components that make up humus, these humic substances, based on the size of the molecule. And so it starts with the largest molecule, which is insoluble in water, we refer to as humin. It is a thick, sticky, black substance. Then we have humic acid, a little bit smaller molecule, but a very dark brown, black substance. It is only soluble in high pHs. Then we have fulvic acid. Fulvic acid is a lower molecular weight. It is not a dark black color, but more of a tea colored. And it is soluble across a wide range of pHs. There's one also that's even less talked about, but is still a component of humic substances, and that is omic acid. And omic acid is the smallest molecular fraction of humic substances. And really the only way to isolate it would be to use an alcohol before doing an acidification in order to isolate it. And it's a bit of a complicated process. And that's why you don't see typically omic acids as a singular product. It exists as a function of humic substances, but not as an isolated product. Moving on to the next chapter, I'm going to present this as a problem, though it's not necessarily a problem. It's just a bit of a fact about the whole organic matter, soil humus issue in general. And that is, how do we observe humic material, humus, human? How do we observe this in nature? For the majority of this chapter, I'm going to be referencing several articles by Mr. Robert Palvis, who runs Garden Myths, and also a very specific study that I'll link in the show notes down below. To summarize this, there's a bit of a theory that exists that humic substances don't actually exist in nature. Rather, it's the reaction that takes place during manufacturing that creates these molecules. That if you ran a mass spectrometer of these various humic substances, you're not going to see it, though they technically exist in all these different things, right? So let's dive into a bit of the specifics of how that was discovered and where we even come up with our current day definitions for what humic substances actually are. To kind of preclude this, why I think this is important, it goes to show the variability we get from humic substances in terms of performance on various turfgrass applications and in various turfgrass soil conditions and even just different turf types in general. We get all these different responses from various sources of humic acid. And I think a lot of that plays into what we're actually unpacking right here. Number one, the idea of soil humus began about 200 years ago. Scientists were analyzing what they perceived to be highly productive soils, and they wanted to figure out what made them highly productive. One of the first things they noticed was that they were dark. At the time, that was one of the ultimate signifiers of having a highly productive soil was having dark soil, although now that has obviously been proven to be not true. It is true that some dark soils are highly productive, but it is not a guarantee that a dark soil will be highly productive. Just like a red clay is arguably typically perceived as being an unproductive, undesirable soil type, when in reality, there are some red clays that are actually extreme producers, especially in the high yield agricultural world for certain types of crops. They wanted to extract this dark substance from the soil colloid. And so in order to do that, they used a strong alkali. So when we think about on the pH scale, we have acids on one end, we have alkalis on the other, right? So they were using a strong alkali. The first extractant they ever used was sodium hydroxide. So they made a soil solution and a solution of sodium hydroxide that read at a pH of 13. When they mixed the two, they noticed that there was a coagulant of material and a very dark liquid that formed as a result of it. They referred to this that they extracted this removal of this dark material from the individual soil minerals and soil particles. Remember, if they used an acid, that would dissolve a lot of the soil minerals like iron or manganese or magnesium. But if they used a very strong base, they would leave behind a lot of those minerals and just remove that fraction that they were actually looking to analyze. So this became the standard for measuring humus levels in soil, was measuring how much material was removed when they reacted it with a strong alkali. In this particular instance, sodium hydroxide. We'll talk about that as it relates to a particular study that was published in a highly regarded journal. This study by Lehman and Kleber, which was published in Nature, which is one of the most elite journals we have out there in our field, proposed that soil humus does not actually exist. Rather, it is this created thing that happens when you expose a hydroxide or anything that is high pH to soils. So just to clarify, all soils contain organic matter, right? However, measuring this organic matter, specifically the humus or humic substance fraction of your soil, it doesn't actually really exist in nature until you react it with a strong alkali. So what they propose in this article is revisiting the methodology for measuring humus levels. I want to quote this from the study. Since first used over 200 years ago, the alkaline extraction technique has undergone many iterations, but the principle has remained identical. In its modern version, the procedure involves the addition of a sodium hydroxide solution with a very high pH of 13 to a soil sample. At this pH, most oxygen-containing functional groups in organic matter are ionized, making organic compounds bearing such groups much more soluble in water. After adding protons to the solubilized organic materials, a dark solid precipitate forms that is commonly called humic acid. The organic matter that remains soluble after reacidification is called fulvic acid. The considerable proportion of organic matter that does not respond to the treatment, either for a lack of ionizable functional groups or because it was shielded from the harsh alkaline treatment by mineral protection, is named human. The study goes on to point out three distinct problems with this extraction method. Number one, this extraction method only removes 50 to 75% of the extractable material. So quantifying the total organic matter based on the humic and fulvic fractions that are extracted is not a very accurate reading of what the actual total organic matter levels are or even the humus levels are. Number two, there are still going to be some compounds dissolved by the strong alkali that shouldn't be part of the equation at all. Some actual organic matter, some actual leaves will be dissolved by the strong alkaline solution. In some instances, even like waxes and stuff can be dissolved by it as well. Therefore, still not giving us an actual accurate representation of what it is. And so because of this, it leaves us with a very weird definition of what it actually is. So it's just what dissolves into the alkali solution that we're actually giving a name versus quantifying what those individual components are. I don't know if you've ever seen a soil test that lists organic matter as humus, and then on other soil tests, it will list it as just organic matter. Therein lies the confusion between the different definitions. Number two, an alkaline solution with a pH of 13 ionizes fractions of the soil that wouldn't necessarily dissolve within a typical pH range of, say, 3.5 to 9. This means that the humic and fulvic fractions are actually products of exaggerated chemical reactivity instead of actually true soil isolates. And then number three, which I would argue is kind of but this method was developed before the practice of theory. And I'll quote from this. It tempted scientists to develop explanations for the synthesis of materials resembling operationally extracted humic substances rather than develop an understanding of the nature of all organic matter in soil. Now, None of this is coming up to paint the picture over whether or not humic acid is a functional product in turfgrass. Rather, it's to understand just a lack of clear scientific consensus over what it actually is, and more specifically, how to even define it. There's not a lot of stability within the molecule itself. The only thing that's really observed is that there is some biological activity that occurs because of it. And to kind of touch on what I talked about earlier, if you were to take something that has a known humic acid value and looked at it under a mass spectrometer, would you see the humic acid in it? And the answer to that is no. In order for you to be able to observe the humic acid in it, you would still have to react it with an alkali. Even though there's been many different mass spectrometer techniques that have developed and that have come about and allowed us to actually see humic acid, it's only after the reaction with a strong alkali. I want to give you a couple of those just to make sure you understand the complexity that goes in here of just trying to define this. According to the study, mass spectrometric techniques for characterization of platinum humic substance complexes in soil and street dust samples, I quote, ESIQMS obtained a spectra very intensive and characterized by great complexity and irreproducibility, making molecular weight assignment difficult. The spectrum obtained by ESI ion trap MS mass spectrometry is characterized by low resolution and is not helpful for clarifying the structure of a complex mixture of humic substances. MALDI-TOF-MS still does not allow the determination of molecular weight and identification of the structure of humic substances. Now, if you are putting this under a strong alkali extraction method, molecular signatures of humic acids from different sources as revealed by ultra-high resolution mass spectrometry in the Environmental Behavior of Effects and Pollutants in Water Journal. KOH solution is added to the precipitate and the pH was adjusted to 13 and then was able to be observed. So no matter how you pin it, whether you're looking at peat moss or leaves or Leonardite, mass spectrometers are not identifying humic acid. Our next section is all about making humic acids. We've identified that in order to make a humic acid or extract a humic acid, basically we're reacting an organic matter or an organic material with an alkaline solution. For instance, if we take a solution of potassium carbonate and mix it with Leonardite, we see the humic acid dissolve and a bit of sediment forms on the bottom. The sediment is unreacted humus or human. If we use potassium hydroxide mixed with Leonardite, we see humic acid dissolve and the sediment form on the bottom. If we use an acid like citric acid mixed with Leonardite, we see nothing form. Nothing goes into solution, nothing dissolves. If we take our potassium carbonate Leonardite mix and add an acid, like citric acid, we see something interesting. The humic fraction falls out of solution and settles. The water layer on top has a tea color. The water layer on top is fulvic acid. Any organic matter really can be used to generate humic acid, though to only varying degrees of success. The most popular methods of producing humic acid are humic acid derived from manure, peat moss, compost, soil, and coals like Leonardite or lignite or humulite, or you get the point. When we go into the next section, we're going to be looking through a series of published studies and dissertations from all over the turfgrass industry, and specifically ones that look at humic acid influence in turfgrass studies. And these are published studies that anyone can look up and review. I'm going to have to quote a lot of this, so I'm going to be reading a fair bit from the screen just to make sure I get everything correct. So I'll do some highlights. The first one is going to be from Alex Lindsay, Adam Thomas, Nick Christians. This is a post was published in the Agronomy Journal in 2019, and it is Kentucky bluegrass and Bermudagrass rooting response to humic fertilizers during greenhouse establishment. The purpose of this study was to conduct greenhouse research and examine the effects of adding humic products to fertilizer on turfgrass. The objective of this study was to determine if the addition of humic products to fertilizers will increase turfgrass root and shoot morphological parameters. Results suggest that starter fertilizer application is critical to turfgrass rooting at establishment. Adding humic products to the starter fertilizer did not increase rooting. Starter fertilizer alone outperformed any of the applications that combined humic acid with it. The next study is going to be in the Journal of Plant Nutrition. This was humic acid that was applied monthly, and this study is the effect of foliar applications of humic acid on growth, visual quality, nutrient contents, and root parameters of perennial ryegrass. Different concentrations of humic acid of 0, 100 parts per million, 400 parts per million, and 1,000 parts per million were applied monthly as foliar applications. Results showed that leaf phosphorus, leaf potassium, leaf zinc content, fresh and dry weight of the leaf, chlorophyll content, and root fresh weights were not affected by humic acid. Meanwhile, humic acid improved the root and shoot development except for root fresh weight. While just 100 parts per million improved height, visual quality, nitrogen content, root length, and root surface area, all of the humic acid concentrations were effective on iron content. Now, in this one specific study, as your rate of humic acid increased beyond 100 parts per million or 100 milligrams per liter, at the higher rates, we actually had a negative impact on the roots of the plant. Root surface area declined by as much as 50% at the higher rates. Root length was decreased by as much as 30%. Root diameter was also decreased by as much as 30%. But again, this applies to perennial ryegrass. The evaluation of humic fertilizers applied at full and reduced nitrogen rates on Kentucky bluegrass quality and soil health. This is again by Alex Lindsay, Adam Thomas. This is out of Iowa State and is funded by the Andersons. The treatments did not have an effect on soil phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, calcium, zinc concentrations, pH, cation exchange capacity, organic matter, moisture, or compaction. The treatments did not have an effect on microbial biomass nitrogen, but did affect microbial biomass carbon. There were no differences in microbial C to N ratios. The treatments had little impact on soil pH, CEC, organic matter, and soil nutrient concentrations aside from sulfur concentrations, but one of the products applied was a calcium sulfate gypsum product that did have sulfur, thus would make sense why soil S concentrations increased. Treatments had a stronger effect on biological activity assessed by 14-day incubation. Synthetic fertilizers with humic and gypsum, polymer-coated humic-coated urea, and stabilized nitrogen had greater potentially mineralizable carbon compared to reduced rates of urea combined with a humic dispersible granule and a 3/4 rate of urea and a humic dispersible granule versus the non-treated control. Polymer-coated, humic-coated urea and stabilized nitrogen had 41% greater potentially mineralizable carbon pool compared to urea at a half rate with humic dispersible granules and the non-treated control. Urea, synthetic fertilizer with humic and gypsum, and polycoat, humic coat had 48% greater potentially mineralizable nitrogen relative to the non-treated control. And so to kind of summarize this, the addition of humic to urea did have a positive influence. The influence was no greater than just urea or stabilized urea in the test parameters that they defined as being soil health. In this particular instance, they're talking about potential mineralizable carbon and potential mineralizable nitrogen. So if you're applying urea or stabilized urea or polymer-coated urea, there is no net gain by adding humic to that and improving those particular health parameters of the soil. A couple of notes also from that study: humic acid did not improve nutrient uptake. Humic acid did not help soil moisture. Humic acid did not improve organic matter content in the soil. Humic acid had no influence on soil CECs, and humic acid did not improve soil compaction either. This is one from Texas A&M. And I just kind of quoted from this where they actually mapped out how much humic acid you would have to apply to move the needle for soil CECs. Humic acid has a CEC in the range of 500 to 600 mecs per 100 grams. If you added 2 pounds of dry or 1 gallon of liquid per cubic yard, or that would be 2 pounds over 324 square feet or 1 gallon over 324 square feet, it would increase soil CECs by 0.37 mecs. As an example, if you were to instead top dress with an 80-20 sand peat mixture, it would increase soil CECs by 2.7 mecs or 7.5x that of the humic product. Thus, to have a meaningful impact on soil CECs, rates past the point of detriment would be required. So while it's possible to move soil CECs with humic acid, we're talking about extremely high rates that could cause interference with some of the uptake of other nutrients. In this particular instance, they would say you would have to apply a gallon over 324 square feet. That's a gallon of concentrate, or that would be 3 gallons per 1,000 square feet approximately as pure concentrate, just to move it 0.37 mecs on your CEC scale, which isn't much at all. Humic substances effect on moisture retention and phosphorus uptake in Intermountain West putting greens. There was no significant difference in the color recorded for the humic acid and non-humic acid treatments, irrespective of either phosphorus or nitrogen concentrations applied. The difference in fresh weight between the lowest phosphorus concentration and all of the others was significant. Humic acid did not stimulate tissue growth, irrespective of the level of phosphorus applied. Similarly, dry weight was not affected by humic acid application, but phosphorus concentration did have an effect. There was no difference in fresh weight for the different treatments except where nitrogen was applied at 25% concentration only. The addition of humic acid to this treatment significantly reduced tissue growth. Humic acid application did not influence color. This was further supported by the findings for color assessment and EC measurements where no differences between humic acid and non-humic acid treatments were found. And to summarize this, humic acid did not improve color beyond nitrogen and phosphorus as limiting factors. The phosphorus impacted plant development beyond any of the other nutrients or humic acid. And adding humic acid to reduce rates of nitrogen significantly reduced the amount of growth the plant was taking, and humic acid did not improve color in this study. This next study is the dissertation from Alex Lindsay that he did at Iowa State to get his PhD, and the study is called Evaluation of Humic Fertilizers on Turfgrass. There's like 7 chapters of this. It's worth going through. It took me about a month to get through all of it and sort out the details, but there's a lot of great information in here. Traffic simulation and percent green cover. There were minimal differences in starting percent green cover for any treatments in 2019 and 2020. However, in 2019, polymer-coated sulfur-coated urea, a regular slow-release urea fertilizer, was the only treatment that retained more percent green cover compared to urea and the non-treated. Furthermore, all treatments resulted in 36% greater percent green cover loss compared to polymer-coated sulfur-coated urea. In 2020, no treatment differences occurred in terms of a percent green cover loss event. Overall, minimal differences were observed during the traffic portion of the experiment, and humic acid had no influence. So specifically, year by year, year number 1 for traffic recovery, no treatments were significantly greater than urea in terms of turfgrass recovery. It was polymer-coated sulfur-coated urea that actually performed better than any of the humic acid products. Combined with fertilizer. Traffic recovery year number 2, urea outperformed all other fertility sources aside for the slopes, which synthetic fertilizer with black gypsum, when applied at double the rate twice compared to 1 app of the other products, performed best. So, and to kind of summarize this, urea or polymer-coated urea had ultimately the greatest impact on traffic recovery. Humic did not have that influence because even when applied with N rates, if N rates went up, it performed better. Just the addition of humic to it did no better than urea or coated urea or just applying nitrogen alone. Where they did notice increase, it was where they applied double the rate of nitrogen that also had the black gypsum. It had a greater influence. They did not test a double rate of just urea to confirm if that was the case, but they did hypothesize that it was driven more by nitrogen demand, more so than it was the addition of humic acid or black gypsum to any of the fertilizer applications. Soil moisture, surface hardness, rotational resistance, and shear strength. In contrast, Brosnan, overall, no differences were seen in soil moisture, surface hardness, and shear strength throughout the duration of the experiment. In contrast, Brosnan et al. Found on average 37 applications of preventative growth regulators increased turfgrass cover by 45% compared to the non-treated at the conclusion of traffic events. Overall, humic substances incorporated with fertilizer treatments resulted in no improvement in terms of percent green cover loss events. So what they said is that as a bit of a management strategy, preventative growth regulators did improve traffic tolerance. The humic acid had no effect on it. In 2020, humic-coated urea, polymer-coated humic-coated urea, synthetic fertilizer with black gypsum, polymer-coated sulfur-coated urea, and urea resulted in greater turfgrass recovery compared to the non-treated. On average, in 2020, 4 applications of N per year increased turfgrass recovery by 33 and 36% relative to 2 applications of N per year in the non-treated, respectively. Similar results were found by Hoffman et al., which reported that increased N rates provided quicker turfgrass recovery to simulated wear. Thus, this also pointing to the fact that nitrogen is the driver of recovery, not the humic substances addition added to nitrogen applications. In conclusion, the addition of humic substances to fertilizer treatments did not result in improved traffic tolerance. Turfgrass quality. The addition of humic substances to nitrogen fertilizer did not increase turfgrass quality and percent cover compared to nitrogen fertilizer alone. Fertilizer applications and the addition of humic substances had minimal effect on microbial biomass. Nitrogen fertilizer rates and humic products affected potentially mineralizable carbon pools and nitrogen pools. Greater nitrogen fertilizer rates increased potential mineralizable carbon by 40% and 37% relative to reduced N rates in humic treatments that received no N. But the addition of humic substances to fertilizer appears to have minimal effect on potential mineralizable carbon. So in this particular instance, they're quantifying this by defining potentially mineralizable carbon and potentially mineralizable nitrogen as soil health. So that's how they are measuring soil health, or by those two potentially mineralizable pools. And what they unpacked in these studies was that humic acid had no influence on soil health. Potentially mineralizable pools of carbon and nitrogen did not increase beyond what just nitrogen would give. Humic products did not increase those pools beyond what nitrogen would. This is from University of Florida, looking at humic combined with micronutrients and looking at the influence that iron humate had on turfgrass quality. Over a 2-year period in 2 Florida locations, a single application of iron humate at the rate of 20 pounds of iron per acre resulted in no improvement in Bermudagrass color or quality. The influence of humic acid on water retention and nutrient acquisition in simulated golf putting greens. So this is another study looking at the water holding capacity and influence that humic acid plays on watering requirements on putting greens. None of the organic acid treatments improved water retention in the simulated greens. The humic acid treated greens required more frequent irrigation than the untreated greens, indicating that they were drying out more quickly. In addition, the humic acid did not result in an increased tissue concentration of nutrients in the bentgrass, top growth, dry shoot mass compared to the other treatments. However, creeping bentgrass root length was greater in the greens treated with humic acid compared to the untreated control. So in this particular instance, what they observed was that humic acid actually dried out the greens faster, thus causing them to require increased irrigation rates. And it did improve root length, but it did not affect nutrient uptake, tissue levels of nutrients within the plant, top growth, or dry shoot mass. Now, for this next section, I want to get into the successes of humic acid because while there are negatives, I think it's important that we go ahead and unpack the positives too to give the most neutral and thorough look at what humic acid can offer as possible. This is also from the study from Alex Lindsay at Iowa State University, his dissertation, The Evaluation of Humic Fertilizers on Turfgrass. Overall, humic fertilizer treatments had minimal effect on soil physical and chemical properties besides the soil S concentration, but again, one of the products contained gypsum. Reduced rates of nitrogen fertilizer applied with humic substances provided equivalent turfgrass quality, percent cover, and reduced clipping biomass relative to full nitrogen rates, which could allow for reducing mower frequency while sustaining acceptable turfgrass quality. Furthermore, reduced nitrogen rates with humic substances maintain biological soil health parameters compared to full N-rate fertilizers, which suggests that the humic substances allow for reduction in N-rates without sacrificing overall soil health. In conclusion, humic substances can be applied with N-fertilizers at reduced rates while providing acceptable turfgrass quality and cover, reducing clipping biomass, and maintaining soil health parameters compared to fertilizers at full N-rates. Applications of reduced N fertilizer rates with the addition of humic substances could be incorporated into a more sustainably and environmentally friendly turfgrass program. Further research is needed to determine if N rates could be reduced further with the addition of humic substances while maintaining turfgrass quality. Additionally, research should be conducted to determine the optimal application timings and rates of humic substances for enhanced microbial activity. Finally, future experiments should also be conducted on different soil types and climatic conditions to determine if the turfgrass and soil response to humic substances is widespread or site-specific. So this is pretty interesting. So what we see here is that by the addition, so in this particular instance, you could reduce and still maintain turfgrass quality nitrogen rates by 25%, and you would still have the same levels of mineralizable carbon and mineralizable nitrogen pools. Even though you did reduce the rate of nitrogen, now you're adding humic back in place of that 25% reduction you did. You still fell within the parameters of turfgrass quality. Now, your turfgrass quality wouldn't necessarily be greater than that of nitrogen, but you were still within the level. They quoted a 6 score on turfgrass quality as being an acceptable level, and reducing your nitrogen rates and adding in humic in combination with that kept you above the 6, which was the threshold for what they considered acceptable turfgrass quality. In sand-based creeping bentgrass at greens height, it appears humic products allow for lowering N rates while maintaining similar turfgrass quality compared to full N rates. Humic substances, especially black gypsum incorporated with N fertilizer, have potential to improve microbial biomass and microbial activity. In Kentucky bluegrass on native soil, applications of starter fertilizer resulted in increased root and shoot growth regardless of turfgrass species, benefiting seed and establishment. Adding humic products to starter fertilizer did not increase rooting, but in the absence of a starter fertilizer application, polymer-coated humic-coated urea and humic plus humic dispersible granules improved Kentucky bluegrass total root length compared to urea during greenhouse establishment. So basically, if you have sufficient soil levels of phosphorus, or you're applying phosphorus at establishment, humic didn't have an effect. But if you are in an area where you have phosphorus restrictions, or you don't want to apply phosphorus for whatever reason, you can still get a positive impact in root growth by applying humic, although it won't be to the same level that it would be if you applied phosphorus. So it's a way to still get a positive influence on the development of the plant, on the root development of the plant. But ultimately, if you want to maximize your chance for success there, phosphorus is necessary. But if you have to eliminate phosphorus, humic would be an acceptable replacement for that. Fertilizers alone and in combination with humic substances increase microbial biomass over time. However, this increase in microbial biomass did not translate into increased microbial activity. So we see that fertilizers increase microbial biomass. So did humic substances increase, especially when you combined the fertilizers with humic substances, they increase microbial biomass. October, humic substances influence creeping bentgrass growth. The application of humic acid materials at 400 parts per million in hydroponic culture significantly increased root mass compared with untreated turf on almost every sampling in the greenhouse study. The response to lower rates was not as conclusive. The effect of humic acid and mulches on characteristics of tall fescue. Plant height, fresh and dry weighted lawn clippings, photosynthetic index, leaf texture, and overall turfgrass quality were measured. Spraying humic acid significantly improved the measured factors except for the dry weight and photosynthetic index of the plants. The mulches, unfortunately, vermicompost provided better impressions on improving the characteristics of the turfgrass. It's 48% increase in fresh weight, 18% increase in height, 48% increase in total quality, and 10% reduction in leaf. So the vermicompost was actually the big winner here, but humic acid did play some important roles here in improving some of the characteristics of the tall fescue. So this study is out of Korea. This is the application of liquid fertilizer containing humate to improve rhizosphere activation, favoring turfgrass quality. And here we're looking at Pencross bentgrass in a sand root zone. Liquid fertilizers applied monthly at 3 ounces, 6 ounces, and 12 ounces. And these liquid fertilizers also contained humic acid, microbial cultures, and seaweed extract. As compared to the controlled fertilizer, soil chemical properties of the fertilizer with humic treatments were not significant. Visual quality and root dry weight of humic fertilizer treatments were higher than control fertilizer. The humic fertilizer level was positively correlated with visual quality, chlorophyll content, clipping yield, and nitrogen uptake amount. However, this product also did contain a microbial package and a seaweed extract. It was not just a humic product. This next study, humic acid-based biostimulants impact on root viability and hormone metabolism in creeping bentgrass putting greens. The results of this study suggest that foliar applications of humic acid may be used as an effective tool for improving turf performance in creeping bentgrass putting greens during summer months. Humic acid treatment improved root length and surface area, root volume, biomass, and a viability of control of water and IBA hormone. This is Dr. Irvin's research out of Virginia Tech. This is great research. He really took a look at this from multiple different biostimulant formulations that we see out there. In a greenhouse study experiment, Crenshaw bentgrass was grown in solution culture supplied with non-limiting nutrients, meaning there was no stress on the plant, and 3 concentrations of humic acid. Photosynthesis and root growth was increased significantly from 1 to 4 weeks after treatment of humic acid at 400 parts per million. 2 humic sources compared against fertilizer only. Fertilizer inputs equalized. Peat versus Leonardite, both applied at 3 ounces every 2 weeks for 6 applications. We saw an increase in root strength. However, the peat humic acid provided a much stronger root strength in Kentucky bluegrass than the Leonardite humic acid. In tall fescue, the addition of seaweed extract plus humic acid did not alter tall fescue survivability or physiological function when subjected to deficit irrigation. However, if there was no stress within the plant, they perform well. Now, out on the internet, I have seen other studies that were referenced related to a couple of different things related to humic acid, right? So we'll kind of move through those studies one by one, particularly with humic acid and phosphorus uptake. What we tend to see in turfgrass on more than one occasion is inhibition of phosphorus uptake. So we'll kind of take a look at other studies out there that show positive correlation between phosphorus uptake and what those studies are actually showing us. So again, I'm going to read from this. The first study is going to be Humic Substances, their influence on creeping bentgrass growth and stress tolerance. And this particular section, the effects on root development, shoot development, visual quality, and nutrient concentration. The influence of humic acid applications on nutrient of solution-grown plants was minimal. The lack of improved rooting was related in part to a lack of phosphorus uptake response in solution culture and field culture experiments. The leaf tissue concentration of several other nutrients was significantly affected by treatment application. However, the differences were so small that they were probably not important to plant growth. For the section related to influence on the growth and nutrient content of creeping bentgrass under heat stress, Rooting was generally not improved by humic acid application during heat stress. Application of humate did not influence the uptake of mineral nutrients in sand culture. However, in solution culture, in hydroponic systems, humic acid application significantly reduced uptake of nitrogen, phosphorus, and magnesium, and increased the uptake of potassium and boron. Application of humic substances did not result in significantly improved heat tolerance. In the section Influence on Growth and Nutrient Content of Creep and Bentgrass Under Salt Stress, the summary is, in general, application of humic acid did not improve salinity tolerance of creeping bentgrass. This is going to be another study that focused on calcareous soil and the movement of humic acid. Movement of phosphorus in calcareous soil as affected by humic acid is the specific study. When humic was applied with calcium phosphate, humic acid increased the mobility of phosphorus, which may increase uptake potential of phosphorus. However, the study did not measure phosphorus uptake as the previous studies did. It just measured the rate at which phosphorus moved through the soil when combined with humic acid. Another thing to note is the effect of humic acid addition, the humic acid addition to the soil media as time went on. So in the first 7 days, they saw good movement, but say from 7 to 28 days, that movement significantly reduced, as did the solubility of the phosphorus. Humic acid applications to lettuce do not improve yield, but do improve phosphorus availability. So there's a couple things about this study. One, humic acid did not affect lettuce yield, right? So the weight of your lettuce that you're getting by making your applications, it had no influence on that. However, it did improve the phosphorus removal rate. The study ultimately did not test a humic product. It tested a fulvic product. So under the materials and methods, you'll see that they used a humic acid product that contained polymeric polyhydroxide acid. It had characteristics of organic matter, nitrogen, potassium, magnesium, sulfur, iron, and manganese, which most humic acids do not in general, but it had a pH of 3.5. And as you recall in the previous section, acidified humic acid is no longer humic acid. It's the fulvic acid that remains in solution at that point. So this test was conducted with a fulvic acid, not a humic acid. That's why I omitted it from my list of studies. The next one is the effect of humic acids on the availability of phosphorus fertilizers in alkaline soil. Again, this is another study that used acidified humic acids, also known as fulvic acids. And here's the chart here for you to take a look at. So that way you can see that the pH ranges here are going to be between 1 and 5.8. For another study, the effect of humic acid and phosphate sources on nutrient composition and yield of radish grown in calcareous soil. Again, I left this one out for two reasons. There's no clear definition on the type of humic acid that was used. Is it an acidified humic acid? Is it not? Is it a fulvic acid, basically? And the reason why I say this is because when you look at the contents of their humic acid, it's 15% humic acid, 10% fulvic acid, 1% nitrogen, 4% phosphorus, and 6% potassium. I scoured the internet as aggressively as I could, and I could not find a product or a label that showed a 1:4:6 N to P to K ratio that also contained humic acid, a humic acid portion of it. So it's impossible to tell just from that. Is this actually what exactly are the characteristics of this product beyond? What exactly are the characteristics of this product, right? The second thing was that it measured specifically the interaction of humic acid with a phosphorus source I had never heard of, nor could I find any record of existence on the internet as well, and that is a super biophosphate. Now, this study was conducted in Egypt, so there could be some differences there, but they did make reference to one specific thing about this phosphorus product, and you'll have to bear with me. It's been translated from Arabic to English, and so it's going to read a little bit funny. However, they said also observed a rise in values with the addition of calcium superphosphate, but less than super biophosphate. And order to contain microorganisms that availability of elements. Now that last part doesn't make sense, but I found another it found the study in Arabic and put it through, and basically they're alluding to that the super biophosphate contained microorganisms that may have affected the availability of the phosphorus in the super biophosphate. So I just want to make it clear that there are studies out there with positive interactions, at least these ones that I looked at that have been quoted on the internet before. I just went ahead and took a look at those to see what materials and methods look like, so that way we can kind of quantify how they fall into the space versus the ones we looked at earlier. So, in conclusion, first, I want to preface this by saying there is a significant amount of information to digest in this video. It took me more than a month to put all of this together. Even just some of the studies that I went through here took me longer than a month to even read through. So, I highly recommend you watch this more than once and unpack the pieces that pertain to you. The second thing I really want to highlight here is that without a doubt, I think what the studies do show is that there is a proven biological activity that occurs through the use of humic acid. Number three is that in order to maximize the benefit you get out of humic acid, you have to choose the appropriate timing, the appropriate source, the appropriate target crop, and have the appropriate soil conditions in order to really maximize your bang for your buck in that type of scenario. Now, I think it's also important to highlight, and one of the main reasons I wanted to do this is that a lot of the things that is touted as a benefit of humic acid, we see, at least in turfgrass studies, not necessarily being the case. So if you're applying humic acid for purely the intent of improving your soil structure, if you're applying humic acid to get additional nutrients into the plant, aside from iron, you're probably not getting that, aside from iron and maybe nitrogen. With that said, though, one of the benefits you do get out of it is that if you are applying nitrogen in combination with humic acid, you do run into the potential of being able to reduce your overall inputs of nitrogen to the plant. Now, where that can come into a situation and why it's important to pay attention to your sources and timings is that you also may play detriment to the uptake of various nutrients, such as phosphorus, for instance. I think it's been highlighted multiple times over that there is some sort of bizarre interaction between phosphorus and humic acid, and it seems to be more pronounced maybe in turfgrass than it does in agricultural crops. However, it is also observed in agriculture. And so I think it's important that if you are making that type of application to reduce your overall nitrogen input, that you pay close attention to managing your phosphorus levels within the plant. And that can be done through timing, it could be through managing your soil phosphorus levels. So it's not like you shouldn't apply it at all because you're going to completely starve the plant of phosphorus. I'm just saying it's something to keep in your mind that it's not necessarily a cure-all from the standpoint of being able to go out every application all year long, 64 applications a year, and think that you're going to isolate some sort of positive benefit out of it. At that point, you're starting to encroach into areas of beyond what is even studyable about application of the product. From an environmental perspective, the idea of being able to reduce nitrogen is a very important one. At the same time, we do see is that nitrogen alone is actually a pretty primary driver of the success of soil health of the soils. And so being able to capitalize on a reduced nitrogen input and still get an overall benefit through your soil health, I think that's very appealing. Now, in terms of soil compaction, soil CECs, soil moisture, phosphorus uptake, all of those things are things you should take into account as you're applying these things. Because I know, just based on what I see as far as information out there, some of the touted benefits have never really been realized in turfgrass, at least not with repeatability. We may see it in hydroponic culture, but we don't see it in soil conditions, or we see it in field conditions and we don't see it in sand conditions. And so a lot of these variables need to be further researched and further understood. A lot like we saw in Dr. Lindsay's dissertation, and what he explained is that where the next research frontier really should lie is what is replicable across a wider variety of soil conditions, temperatures, turf types, individual cultivars, because we see in certain instances higher rates of humic acid on perennial ryegrass. At least one specific cultivar, perennial ryegrass, had negative impacts being at rates that would be considered just average, ordinary rates that we may be applying in a lawn care type capacity. In fact, it needed fractional rates to really shine, and anything beyond that was actually a detriment at that point. So anyway, all of this to say, and to answer the question, is humic acid a scam? I think that question is best left up to you, having taken the opportunity to analyze the data. There's a significant amount of data here. You're not going to watch this once and come to any sort of conclusion. With anything, I think it's important to highlight is that everything we have available to us as turf managers is a tool in the toolbox, and it's up to us to be able to use things correctly and maximize the benefit we get out of the dollar spent. Where we may be saving money on nitrogen, we may be spending an increased total because of the cost of adding back that 25% nitrogen in the form of humic acid. The other thing to consider too is humic acid going to be the difference between you having a successful lawn and not having a successful lawn, between you having a successful golf green and non-successful golf green, the difference between you having a sports field with great playability and one that doesn't? No, absolutely not. NPK is going to be the primary driver of all of those things. And so if you're getting into this, or you're even advanced into this, make sure you have that dialed in first, because humic acid isn't going to take the place of that. All that to say, I hope you enjoyed today's video. A couple of notes: if you haven't listened, please check out the podcast Burn and Return. It's available on all your favorite podcast apps. Also, we do a live show every Thursday, where we invite someone from the community to come on and talk to us about what they're experiencing, whether it's in business or just as a hobby. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next one.